At the start of the Mighty Marvel Western event, I said that there was no connective tissue or storyline to the individual issues at all, that each story stands alone. And that's true for each issue, but it isn't quite true of today's opening story. In 2005, author Dan Slott got a second volume of his She-Hulk run. Now, this is a pretty universally loved comic, and I have to add that it is a fun read. I enjoyed that one. Early on in the book's life, a time travel story ended up with a deceased Avenger returning to life. And that character is the Two-Gun Kid. As a lawyer himself, Matt Hawk went to work for the same law firm that She-Hulk worked for, and they had a few adventures together. One of them involved She-Hulk's fiancée, John Jameson, turning into the Man-Wolf and tearing off into the night. They chased after him out of She-Hulk's ongoing series and into this one-shot. Issues 10 and 11 of She-Hulk are the ones concerned with this story, if you'd like to read them yourself, but this story actually happens during issue 11, like literally it happens between panels. If you're wondering why I'm not covering those issues to provide the context that they do, well, it's because those issues are She-Hulk issues. They are meant to be She-Hulk stories, not Two-Gun Kid stories. And honestly, he is why I'm here. Hilariously, despite tying into She-Hulk, issue 11 of that book doesn't even mention this one-shot. And I also really don't want to extend the Western series for another episode or two. These one-shots are taking me long enough to get through. Whew. Naturally, as the author of She-Hulk, Dan Slott wrote this one, with artwork by Eduardo Barreto and colors by Brad Anderson. The story starts in 2006 era New York City. Two-Gun and She-Hulk ride his mechanical horse. Basically, it's a hovercycle that has no wheels or legs. You just kind of zoom through the air like a Star Wars speeder bike. They race through the night, a full moon high in the sky above them. He pulls them into an alley. The tracker that they're using to follow John indicates that he should be around here somewhere. Deeper in the alley, they do find a homing dart, which Two-Gun had shot John with. He picks it up and pulls a small bit of fur off of it. "Don't you worry, Miss Jenny. He's still close. This is fresh." Alright, cool. She-Hulk tries to push past Matt, eager to find her fiancé, but he asks her to hang back. She might be bigger and stronger than him, sure, but he is better equipped. Matt says this as he draws his guns. "Don't worry, ma'am," he assures her. "I've done this before." My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown episode 19.13, Two-Gun Kid. Two-Gun's thoughts then return to the past, specifically the year 1876, just outside the town of Tombstone. A masked gunman named Kid Clayton and his friend, an indigenous man named Nantan, are hunting down some cattle rustlers. It is also night, and Nantan is starting to get worried. His people don't like this area of land. Nothing can grow here. Any cattleman who would bring his herd through here is a fool, as far as Nantan is concerned. But Clayton wants to take a look, and Nantan sticks with him. As they move through the cursed land, a rough voice taunts the two men. "You never should have stuck your nose in my business, Clayton." A pack of wolves suddenly surround Clayton and Nantan. In the background, we can see a white-furred wolf man, and he appears to be the one talking. Clayton and Nantan open fire, but they can't hit every wolf, and eventually they force their way in. Nantan falls first, and then Clayton, screaming as teeth tear into his hide. Ugh, grim. Weird that Two-Gun remembers this part of the story, given that he wasn't here. I actually didn't even realize that the cowboy that I was reading about in this scene wasn't the Two-Gun Kid. And I mean, he does look different. He is dressed in blue with a red scarf, but he reads like the Two-Gun Kid. And, Two Gun is the one remembering the story, and Slot set me up to think that he was narrating, so I would just figure if he's narrating and he experienced this, then he's the guy who's there. So the writing in this scene is a little bit awkward, but if this story was not tied into the She-Hulk stuff, like if this was just a standalone Western tale, then this setup would honestly work fine. It's not bad on its own. It is a little rough as part of a She-Hulk story, though. A few days later, Two Gun rides into the same pass. He is here for the same reason that Kid Clayton was. He's looking to find that herd of cattle. Widow's Pass isn't any place that he would take cattle, but he has nowhere left to look. He finds the body of Kid Clayton, but he did not know the man personally, and the body is surrounded by a bunch of wolf corpses. Unwilling to let this strange man just rot in the sun, Two Gun approaches, intending to bury him, but a hand suddenly shoots out from under the pile of bodies. Two Gun pushes the wolves aside and finds a dazed, confused Nantan. Carved into his chest is an angry red scar, in the shape of a wolf head. Two Gun tries to pull him out, but Nantan draws his gun. He is not leaving until his friend is buried. And so, Two Gun obliges. It's alright, man. He is eager to leave, though. If Nantan doesn't get help soon, then he is a dead man. Nantan whispers that might be for the best. But when he dies, bury him deep, do you hear? Deep, deep in the ground. And then he passes out. Two Gun approaches the man. Sorry, pard, but one funeral is enough for today. He pulls Nantan onto his horse, which is named Thunder, and they ride off. He is guessing by his clothing that Nantan is an Apache, and he hopes that Chief Zozoni's tribe can help patch him up. He rides to a small settlement. Their initial response to Two Gun is a bit hostile, but Chief Zozoni asks his warriors to put their weapons down. He recognizes Nantan, and the men pull him from the horse, but they start when they see the mark on his chest. The wolf mark! Hurry, one says. We have to take him to the caves. This concerns Two Gun. He ain't much of a doctor, that's for sure, but he knows that Nantan ain't got long if he doesn't see a sawbone soon. One of the men asks about the white man who was with Nantan. Did he have the wolf mark as well? Two Gun shrugs at the question. He didn't have time to check the body before he buried it, so he doesn't really know. Oh, good, the man says. Well, if it's buried, then you already did good. So, get out of here. Two Gun isn't quite ready to leave. I mean, this has all been really weird, but he is also clearly not wanted, and so he leaves. And, to be fair, he does still have a herd of missing cattle to find. He pulls off his domino mask, figuring that if the Two Gun Kid can't find them, then maybe Matt Hawk can. In town, we see Matt Hawk interrupt an argument between a Mr. Barker and a Mr. Svensson. Barker is the man who hired Hawk to defend him in court. He has been accused of being a no-down, dirty cattle rustler. The argument is beginning to turn violent, Barker even drawing his pistol in the street, but Hawk knocks the guns aside, ruining his shot. He was not hired to defend a murderer. As Barker grumpily leaves, Matt approaches Svensson. Does he have any proof that Barker has stolen his cattle? Svensson tells him to take a hike. He don't care much for lawyers. Okay, fine. Matt figures that Svensson must know something, but he ain't talking to Matt Hawk. So maybe he'll talk to the Two Gun Kid. If you couldn't guess, Two Gun then rides to Svensson's claim, and Svensson actually mistakes him for Kid Clayton at first. Yeah, alright, good. So it wasn't just me. Well, thank you, Mr. Svensson. Svensson explains that Clayton had actually come to his rescue. Barker and his posse were rounding up Svensson's cattle when Kid Clayton and Nantan rode to the rescue. He clipped one of the men, and it was Jeb Barker's son, Jeb Jr., and the ranch hand Cochain. They ran off, but they had successfully stolen the cattle. Two Gun has to ask, well, how did you know that it was Jeb Jr.? Jr. has a scar on his chest, Svensson says, one shaped like a wolf. When he told Clayton this, the gunman got really interested. He even left Svensson something, and the old man holds up a silver bullet. Two Gun puts two and two together. Nantan had a wolf mark, Junior had a wolf mark. we got some kind of connection. Back to Chief Zozoni's we ride. By the time Two Gun gets back to the indigenous camp, the sun has lowered and the moon is high in the sky. The camp is empty, and Two Gun finds the tribe nearby doing some sort of ceremony around a bonfire. They are all dressed as wolves and dancing. He doesn't greet them. Instead, he finds a nearby cave. Could this be where they took Nantan? He enters the cave carefully. Other than the sounds of the dancing nearby, it is stone quiet. Burning torches line the walls, allowing him to see pictographs painted on the rocks. Not that he can understand them, although you know what? That one kind of looks like a wolf. Suddenly, a massive, dark-furred wolf man charges a Two Gun. He draws his pistol quickly and opens fire, sinking 6 shots into the creature's chest. But it's still alive. Strangely, he discovers that it is tied to the wall by leather straps. Why? What in heaven's name is this beast? The Apaches heard the wolfman's growl and then charge in. They force the beast back, calling it Nantan. Two Gun's adrenaline is pumping through his veins at this point. Nantan? That thing is Nantan? What is going on here? One of the Apaches tells him to calm down. He'll explain. This particular tribe of Apaches has been guarding this land for generations, protecting it from the wolf that hunts by moonlight. This wolf is an evil spirit that devours men's souls and reshapes them into its image. During the day, the cursed man bears the wolf mark on their chest, and once they have eaten flesh as the wolf, they are bound to the wolf forever. Two Gun looks sadly at Nantan. You mean like him? Nantan still has a chance, the warrior says, if they can find the one who cursed him. He has not yet eaten the flesh of a man, so they can still save him. But it's not going to be easy to kill the creature that did this, even here in this cave where they're weakest. This cave? What's so special about this cave? Two Gun asks. He looks at a nearby wall and notices the silver veins running through it. That's it! Two Gun offers to join the hunting party, but he needs to get something first. Two Gun rides back to where he buried Kid Clayton, and uncovers just enough of him to pull out his pistol. He checks the barrel, and sure enough, it is loaded with silver bullets. A frightened whinny from Thunder warns Two Gun that something is approaching, and he turns. Cresting the nearby ridge are 4 wolfmen and a pack of wolves. Two Gun recognizes the voice of one of them. That's Jeb Barker. Yup, and he knows Two Gun's scent now. Ain't that right, Matt Hawk? They charge, and it forces Two Gun back. He actually ends up sliding into a shallow gully, and he lands in piles of cattle bones. Well, he found the missing cows. So then he starts shooting, saving the gun with silver bullets for the wolfmen. He nails one of them, and the dying beast returns to his human form, but the other wolfmen learn from the encounter. They shift into wolf form, making the job of identifying them harder. Except for Jeb Jr., Two Gun would recognize that limp anywhere. He kills Jr. and another wolf lets out a cry. Ha! You must be either his pappy or his brother. And Two Gun kills Clem Barker, Jeb Jr.'s brother. He's left with 2 wolves and 2 bullets. 1 silver, 1 lead. Which wolf is Jeb Barker? He doesn't know. And as they close in, circling him, he has to take a chance. They dive at him from either side, and he crosses his arms, like Rocco in Boondock Saints, shooting them. He went with his gut. And thankfully, his gut was right. Whew. Throughout the course of the night, Matt buries all of the men. They probably didn't deserve a funeral, but better to bury them and the curse. As he finishes, a ghostly voice whispers, Cochain, the name of the Barker's ranch hand. Two Gun says that, quote, it's a father crying out for his son, end quote. And then there is another sentence in Apache, Chohei Ketanona. The sun is coming up as Two Gun returns to the Apache camp. He finds the warriors at a cook fire, and Nantan is safely with them, returned to his human form. The wolf mark is gone. He's been saved. He asks if he has Two Gun to thank for that, and the gunman says that it tweren't nothing. I'm in your debt then, Nantan says. Whatever you wish. So Two Gun tells him that mysterious phrase that he heard. What does it mean? Nantan grimaces. That is the curse of the long tomorrow, he says. The wolf spirit has sworn vengeance on him, no matter how long it takes to find it. Even if it takes 100 years. And we then return to the present. Well, it's been 130 years, Two Gun thinks, but that same wolf spirit must have possessed John. He always knew that this day would come. And here he pulls a single bullet out of his gun belt, which he has kept since that flashback. Matt kisses it, loads it, and snaps the chamber back into place. As Wolf John dives at Matt from the shadows, he drops to the ground and fires. He knew that John had already tasted flesh, so there's no going back for him. All that he can do is put down the man that Jenny loves. As the bullet lodges in the chest of John Jameson, She-Hulk enters the alley and cries out, "No!" And the story ends. On its own merits, I feel bad to say this, but I have to. This story isn't anything great. There's no surprise in Two Gun hunting werewolves, so it's not like the story is especially shocking. I suppose that there is some added tension knowing that Matt is going up against a werewolf, especially after we see Kid Clayton die to them. Slott even stresses that Clayton and Matt are similar in the story, having even Svensson confuse the two, which makes it seem like Two Gun has the same kind of long odds that Kid Clayton did, so there's a little bit of manufactured tension there. The story structure of this does work. If we remove that awkward transition that we had at the beginning to the past, where Two Gun has to remember things that he didn't witness, then the rest of the story works fine. I especially like that Slott had a reason for Two Gun to be Matt Huck in the story, using his lawyer identity to investigate and find a question that was worth exploring, but then having to find an answer to that question as the Two Gun Kid. Our other stories that were starring the Two Gun Kid have been really heavy on his masked gunman identity, so it is nice to see the lawyer aspect of him get used a bit more. Otherwise, this reads like a standard normal werewolf story. It's fine. It isn't bad, but it's also extremely unnotable other than its connection to She-Hulk. In the context of She-Hulk, I think that this story's kind of hilarious. In issue 11 of that particular volume, John Jameson turns into the man-wolf, attacks one of Jen's co-workers, biting them, and then he runs off into the night. She-Hulk and Two Gun follow him into the alley, and then we, having read this issue, see this flashback sequence. But if all you're reading is She-Hulk, then there is no flashback. Jen sees Two Gun say that he's got this. And then out of nowhere, he kisses a silver bullet and shoots the man that she loves. The very man that they're trying to save. Like, what the fuck?
No swearing.
Man, what are you doing? So, if you only read She-Hulk, then Two Gun kind of looks like a madman. But if you read this one-shot, you understand where his head is at and why he is acting this way. But then we have no mention of this one-shot in the context of She-Hulk at all. What the hell, Marvel editorial? Why would you do that to me? Where is the footnote? Where is the asterisk? Where is a thing at the end of the issue being like, you want to see more of Two Gun's adventures with werewolves? You should go buy the Two Gun Kid one-shot. Like, there's nothing there. This is so weird to me. This particular story works best if you have read some of She-Hulk and you know what is going on, but then the She-Hulk story doesn't really need you to read this comic book at all. It's like a reverse spin-off book. It's a spin-in. It's weird. If you are wondering, John Jameson survives being shot. His particular brand of werewolf is not the same as the kind that the Two Gun Kid fought, so he is impervious to silver. He isn't impervious to being shot, but She-Hulk gets him to a hospital, and everything ends up working out. The story gets really weird. One of the best things about Dan Slott's run on She-Hulk is that it is one of the weirder Marvel Universe books I've ever read. Like, it really leans into the fact that it's the Marvel Universe that these stories are being told in. It's a lot of fun, and again, maybe I need to put that on the to read for the podcast list. It's been a while since I've read through that. So this story is fine. It works. But I definitely, personally, prefer the previous 2 one-shots that we've talked about more, at least in the story department. I do actually really enjoy the artwork here. Eduardo Barreto isn't a name that I am very familiar with. Googling him tells me that he is famous stateside for doing a bunch of DC work, including work on Batman, Superman, the new Teen Titans, and a variety of other projects and characters. He has done other work for Marvel, but nothing that is of particular note to me. His style is very much influenced by the work of men like Hal Foster, who created the newspaper strip Prince Valiant. He's a legendary cartoonist. Barreto's line work flows very naturally, but there's a sketchiness to it. This lends it a sense of realism, while still maintaining the look of a comic book. It is also particularly dark, with lots of sketch lines to indicate shadows and the like. It is absolutely perfect for a spooky Western story about hunting werewolves. Colorist Brad Anderson tends to stick to a realistic palette for the story, so we have cool blues and browns at night, but then bright yellows, oranges, and browns during the day. A particularly nice effect that I noted when reading this story is that when someone fires a gun at night, Anderson makes sure to light the muzzle flash, adding to the impact of those shots. They're these small, bright bursts within the darkness. This is a very nice-looking, if slightly generic, story. Our second feature for this issue is called Tall Tale, and it stars the world's smallest cowboy. The story opens with Hugo, who is a small person, riding into town. He's answering the call of an old friend, an old partner, actually. Gabbo and Hugo used to be a team. They would put Hugo in a wooden mask and put on ventriloquist acts. Gabbo would then forget Hugo after the show, and when things closed down, Hugo would rob the place. It worked for quite some time, too, until they ran afoul of the Rawhide Kid. But Hugo turned on his partner. Not only did he not enjoy being a criminal, but he also hated the indignity of having to pretend to be a puppet. Together, Hugo and Rawhide got the gang that he worked for arrested, and Hugo ended up going straight. Rawhide even trained him for a time, teaching Hugo how to be a trick shot. He went on to be a successful part of a Western traveling show, but not because of his size, rather for his skill with a gun. Now, though, Gabbo needs help. He wasn't sure if Hugo would come at all after what happened between them, but he understands why Hugo turned him in, and actually it's all been for the best. Once he got out of jail, Gabbo started a legitimate act with his daughter, Annie, but she's been taken by indigenous men. He needs Hugo's help to get her back. He's the only one that Gabbo knew to call. Hugo is experienced with indigenous tribes. He is said to have hunted buffalo with the Cherokee, wrestled bears with the Apache, and been potty trained by the Kickapoo. Quote, "The Comanche have 37 different names for him, none of them complimentary." End quote. Hugo manages to find the Apaches, but he figures that the only way he's going to sneak into their camp is with his wooden mask and his doll act. So he switches into his old clothes and he tries to set himself up in order to spy, but it never works. He's found at the water barrel and the woman who finds him runs away, shrieking. He tries to sit on a totem pole, but the warriors just roll their eyes when they see him. Ugh, must be some kind of fraternity prank. At one point, he just lays down in the middle of the ground, and a fed-up woman just tells him where Annie is. "Take her and go," she says. "You are creeping us out." Hugo then sneaks into the tent containing Annie. When he finds her, he is shocked to discover that she's a ventriloquist dummy. 6 weeks later, Hugo returns to Gabbo. Hugo tries to tell him about Annie, but Gabbo cuts him off. He knows. He asked Hugo to risk his life for a dummy, but he had to. Without Annie, Gabbo can't make a living, and hand-carved wooden dolls are expensive, my man. You just can't go buy a new one. Hugo kicks Gabbo into a shallow gorge, and then rides off with his new bride. Tall Tale was written by Keith Giffen and Robert Loren Fleming. Giffen is pretty famous for having written comics with a bit of a comedy bent, most notably for his time at DC on titles like Justice League International, The Legion of Superheroes, Ambush Bug, who he often co-wrote with Fleming, and he's the co-creator of Lobo, who was created as a parody of 90s-era extreme characters. Giffen is a super solid writer, and I just wish he had shown up here on this one. Most of the humor in this story comes from a long-running series of short jokes, like when people speak of Hugo, the phrase larger than life is often used, or he's a towering figure of the West, or that he wore a mouse skin hat instead of a coonskin hat, and trained a cricket to ride that he named Grasshopper. We get it, he's a short person.
No swearing.
Hilarious. There is a series of jokes in this story that are vaguely inspired by old Western folktales, like Hugo being raised in an anthill, or that he came to America on the back of rats that rode Columbus's fourth ship, the Half Pinta. I grew up reading about American folklore and men like Paul Bunyan and Johnny Appleseed, and I have to admit, those kinds of stories and the way that Giffen calls back to them within this make Hugo feel like he is part of that tradition. Somehow, for me, those story elements seem much more respectable, I guess. Whereas the jokey wordplay seems more insulting to me, in the way that it points out the irony of Hugo's legendary stature and his actual physical stature. One set of jokes feels like folklore, and then the other set of jokes just feels like insults. I do like Hugo and Gabbo's backstory, though. That stuff is actually true. The pair originally appeared in the Rawhide Kid issue 47. So that's a pretty cool use of Marvel history that I was not expecting to see in this story. But then we head to the Apache's camp, and the jokes return. I don't know why Hugo thought that the Apaches wouldn't notice a ventriloquist dummy, or question how it came into their camp, or not destroy it. I'm actually amazed that no one tried to set him on fire. Like, I know that if I had a ventriloquist dummy just appear out of nowhere in my apartment, I'm confident that it is haunted and it needs to be destroyed. And by fire, nonetheless. And clearly, the Apaches realize that this is a person, so why not drive him out? And why do they relinquish Annie so easily? She must have meant something to somebody in that camp, or why else would they take her? So even this whole aspect of the story just doesn't work for me at all. We don't have a motivation for Annie being kidnapped, and we don't have a motivation for why they would want to keep her, although I do understand that they want Hugo to leave because he's creepy. Ventriloquist dummies are creepy. Sorry, it's always going to be true. Then, when Hugo goes to talk to Gabbo and it's revealed that he is keeping Annie as his wife, what? The joke here is that the small dummy found a small dummy to marry, but even that feels so disrespectful to Hugo. Especially when he already didn't like being treated like a dummy, but then Giffen has him marry one? What the hell is that? Hugo never feels in this story like he is so sad that he needs to marry a wooden woman. He is actually drawn as fairly handsome, in my opinion. He is a successful trick shot, and he is clearly some kind of legend in the American West. But you're telling me that he can't find anyone who is attracted to him otherwise? Come on. Giffen and Fleming are paired with Mike Allred and Lovard Kinzierski for the art. Allred has a very distinct art style, one that has taken me, personally, a very long time to warm to. But here he deviates from that style, drawing with very caricatured faces. Allred is generally described as having a very pop art style of drawing, and there is definitely a bit of that flatness here. The line work is well done, and there is some kind of filter that's laid over the artwork digitally. It gives the book's coloring a dotted feel, like an old-school 4-color print comic book from the 40s or 50s. You're either going to love it or hate it. I personally am not a fan. I like the idea of trying to match the look and presentation of the old school Silver Age comics, but on the other hand, the end of each of these one-shots has had Silver Age comics, and they've all been recolored. So they all look nice and crisp and clean, so we don't even get to see that dotted colored presentation. So I don't feel like this presentation works very well at all. This is probably the single weakest story out of all of the stories that we have seen in the Mighty Marvel Western event so far. It isn't very funny, it isn't very dramatic, and it just leaves me unsatisfied overall. It's only 6 pages long, and part of me does want to give it some slack for that. Like, there's only so much you can do with 6 pages, but we've also seen a number of shorter stories, 6 pages, 8 pages, 5 pages, that all worked way better than this, that all felt more respectful to their characters than this. I like Hugo, I just don't like this story. Our backup Silver Age feature this time, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, is actually a 4-part story called Beware the Terrible Totem, and it stars, of course, the Rawhide Kid. We open to Rawhide on the run, escaping a posse of lawmen that are chasing him down. His horse, Nightwind, steps into a gopher hole and ends up throwing him. With no time left to get back in the saddle, Rawhide lays on the ground and shoots at his pursuers. But he doesn't hit the men, he only hits their equipment. Like, he shoots the saddle off of one of the horses and the reins off of another, slowing their advance. The sheriff tells them all to stop. If Rawhide can shoot like that, then he can pick them off at any time. So, Rawhide is given enough time to climb back onto Nightwind, and the chase resumes. Rawhide makes it into the foothills that he was racing for. He finds a silver mine that he had heard about and stops there. Slapping Nightwind on the hindquarters, he orders the horse to lead the men away and come back for him in the morning. While Nightwind does that, Rawhide approaches the mine and asks for work. The man standing watch tells him that they don't want any strangers, and when Rawhide presses on, he gets punched in the face. He is about to draw his pistol in retaliation, but then Rawhide remembers that he can't shoot his gun. It would draw the posse onto him. So he just stays silent and prepares to leave, when a body is carried out of the mine. The man is still alive, but he passed out from the hard work. So the foreman looks at Rawhide. You know what? You wanted a job? You got one. Now get down there. The other workers tell Rawhide about how tough the foreman is and how terrible the working conditions are. As they reach the bottom floor of the mine, an indigenous man suddenly runs up to them, warning them to turn back. This is where the living totem walks. One of the other workers is skeptical of that, but Rawhide has heard rumors of a living totem, and the cave suddenly starts to shake. A large shadow comes from around the corner. And yeah, a living totem pole walks around it. This creature is easily twice the height of the Rawhide Kid, with a yellow body, red markings all over it in intricate patterns, and 2 stubby arms up at the top. He's got 2 stubby legs down at the bottom, too. As we then move on to Chapter 2, Rawhide holds the line to let the other workers return to the elevator. His bullets slow down the totem, but they don't harm it. He runs through the mine, leading the totem on a chase, and it tells him how futile this is. The totem once tried to conquer the world of men, and now that it is awoken, it's going to finish the job. Rawhide circles back around to where the elevator is, but it hasn't come back down yet. He tries to climb the rope, but the totem grabs it and pulls him back down. Up top, the 3 men that Rawhide had defended have reached the surface and relayed what has happened to the foreman, a man who goes by the fine name of Ben Bragg. He doesn't believe them, of course, and forces them to go back down at gunpoint, and he's going with them just to prove how stupid they are. Rawhide then sees the elevator coming back down, and so he jumps off the rope at the totem. It catches him, but then it is caught off guard by the elevator box. The totem drops Rawhide and grabs onto the box now. The men begin to panic and switch to raising the elevator back up, but they are held onto by the totem. Rawhide starts smacking the totem with a wooden club, drawing its attention back down. As the car goes back up, Chapter 3 starts. Rawhide quickly grabs a rope that is hanging from the elevator box and throws sand in the totem's eyes. He manages to ride the elevator back to the surface, where the men then fall to infighting. Ben Bragg is pissed that his mind is inhabited by a living totem monster, and he somehow blames Rawhide for it. But before he can shoot our hero, the sheriff who was hunting Rawhide at the start of this story manages to return. He actually defends Rawhide from Bragg, but by then it's too late. The totem reaches the surface, and it lurches towards them all. Their bullets still do nothing to harm it, and they are backed into a cave. The totem traps them inside with a large boulder, and then it leaves, planning to subjugate humanity. Yeah, sure, dude. Chapter 4 sees the totem hefting stagecoaches and just terrorizing the West in general. He does look like he has grown in size based on the artwork, but I mean that could just be artistic license. Anyways, the men are getting antsy inside the cave, blaming each other and punching each other. Eventually, one of them finds a small crack in the cave, but the only one who is small enough to fit through it is the Rawhide Kid. The sheriff's men aren't sure if they can trust an outlaw like Rawhide, but honestly, they have no choice. More than that, the sheriff just has a sense that they can trust the Rawhide Kid. So, they help him through the crack, and just in time. Nightwind has returned for Rawhide. With the totem headed towards Abilene, Rawhide can't waste any time. He hops on the horse and rides off, leaving the trapped men stuck in that cave. Rawhide finds the totem and he... So he fires all 12 of the bullets that are in his gun, right? And he does so fast that it creates a cloud of gun smoke. The smoke then blinds the totem, and Rawhide runs into its legs, shoving it off of a cliff. No man has ever escaped this bottomless canyon, Rawhide says. Its sands will hold the totem forever. He then returns to the cave and uses dynamite to free the trapped men. The deputy is eager to arrest the still an outlaw Rawhide Kid. But hell no, the sheriff says. He's gonna arrest Ben Bragg for digging deeper than the law allows. The Rawhide Kid ain't no outlaw, he says. He's a man. And the kid rides off. Man, these stories sure end in a hurry. So I have to say, this Silver Age story works pretty well for me. The 4-part structure certainly helps, as it gives the story a nice rhythm. Chapter 1 sets things up, the second is basically just an action sequence, the third is kind of a lull, trapping our heroes and leaving only Rawhide as the one able to stop this unstoppable totem, and then part 4 wraps everything up. All of the plot threads are addressed, everything closes out, I mean, it works. Lee and Kirby even introduce the sheriff and his men at the beginning of the story, and then bring them back in the third act, which I was not expecting at all. I thought that the sheriff and his posse had just been written out during Chapter 1, so honestly, their return really surprised me. There is also a small idea that I like here that is echoed in the Kid Colt and Arizona Girl story that we read earlier. When the totem tells Rawhide that it came to this world in order to subjugate the earth, it doesn't say it outright, but the totem is an alien. This is something that happens a lot in Lee and Kirby comics. A lot of the monsters that show up are actually aliens. But between the indigenous man's warnings and the totem's bragging, Rawhide figures that the totem must have been trapped by native medicine men. They are the ones who sealed it in stone to begin with, and it was Ben Bragg's digging that released it. Indigenous tribes stopping an early alien threat is a super neat idea, and one that echoes off of real-world stories. I don't know if Lee or Kirby knew about this at the time, but the Cree, the Hopi, and the Lakota all have stories about encounters with star peoples, or aliens. So while the totem is an odd example of that, to be sure, the basic idea has some tie to reality. We see this echoed in Kid Colt and the Arizona Girl, where the local Apache had been trying to isolate the town where the Skrulls were living. So if you consider fighting invading aliens something that superheroes do, then indigenous peoples were historical Marvel's first superheroes. And that's really neat. I do have to comment that Kirby's design for the totem lessens as the story goes on. When it first appears, it's fairly detailed with red designs covering its body, like all over the place. But as the story moves forward, the totem turns into basically a yellow tube with stubby arms and legs with a face on it. This only really bothers me because Kirby is known for intricately detailed designs, and so it is a bit disappointing to seeing that aspect of his talent just not present here at all. Just so you all know, the living totem does eventually reappear in West Coast Avengers issue 18. It is the only other time that it has shown up, and its story beats basically remain the same. It shows up, it threatens some people, then it gets buried under a cliff that Iron Man drops onto it in the story, and then it hasn't shown up ever since. I'm a little sad. I'd kind of like to see a little bit more of that explored. We have seen there's an old Thor story where rockmen try to invade Earth and Thor fights them and then they flee, and that story ended up getting echoed during Greg Pak's Planet Hulk storyline where he introduced the character Korg, who you may be familiar with from Thor Ragnarok or maybe the upcoming Thor Love and Thunder. And so it was really interesting to me to see this old Silver Age throwaway character, to be quite honest, get brought back into the modern, I guess then, modern Marvel Universe and get highly used. Korg features in a number of stories during Greg Pak's run and even a couple spin-off comic books, including the Warbound miniseries that came out of World War Hulk. I really like Korg. He's a fantastic character. I would love to see the Living Totem or the Living Totem's race get that same kind of nod. I don't believe I've ever seen anything in the Marvel Cosmic comics that I've read that actually features whatever race the totem came from, but that would have to be an interesting culture, right? Like just the way those aliens are shaped and built, and then the idea that you're just going to be like twice the height of everybody else and somehow rule the planet. I don't understand. I don't really understand the totem's plan, but it's Silver Age comics. You don't need to understand the plan because he's going to end up buried in a canyon for the rest of his life. I don't know. Like I said, this was still fun, though. More fun than a lot of the Silver Age stories that I've read, but a little dorky. Yeah, sure. Next time, we are chock full of Western goodness as the mighty Marvel Western event approaches its end. We will meet the man called Hurricane. The man from Fort Rango encounters the deadly Puma. And we witness the origin of Red Wolf. Join me in a week for Comic Book Breakdown, episode 19.14, Western Legends.
Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me, to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.